In the first episode of this series about floats, I talked in general terms of why floats are made to catch anglers, not fish, and all the things around that. And now I'm going to get down to more specific things, starting with materials for making floats. Floats have traditionally been made with bird quills, is the simplest thing to make a float from. This is either a crowqill or a rook feather. It's quite a decent sized one. Naturally buoyant, it's easy to strip the hurl off it, and you've got a float. You don't even need to paint it, as long as you can put some sort of float cap on it, which in the very old days they didn't have valve rubber, then invented rubber, and they just cut another section of a slightly bigger quill and slip these sort of quill caps and curl back the quill at the bottom and whip that over to form a sort of crude eye. That was your float. No paint, nothing. And a crowquill is still a useful part of some floats. Perhaps the most important material for modern float making, and it's been around since probably before the Second World War, it's actually a hardwood called balsa, and you can buy either online or in the ever decreasing number of model shops. Used to be able to get it in fishing tackle shops. Balsa dowel, this is probably about 3/8 or even half an inch. You can drill it, you can stick it into the chuck of an electric drill or even a lathe, and you can sand it down and you can shape it. This is a sort of part made float. It's got two bits of a crowquill in it. I just made a hole in each end, that you get more out of it, and there. So balsa wood's very, very important. I was making floats out of balsa wood in the year dot, I think, if I could but find it. Can't find it now. Yes, I can. This is an ordinary balsa float I made in about 1971 or 72. I just shaped some balsa, rounded off the ends, whipped an eye on the bottom, and varnished it and painted it. And after all these years, it's still usable. The tip's not very bright, but that was the paint we used. We used to use kalium, I think it was called. It came with a little brush, and you'd have an undercoat, white undercoat. So if you're going to make floats, first material, absolutely top drawer essential, balsa. And balsa is very good for river floats. So when I start to talk about stick floats, the top half of a stick float is balsa wood. The base will be different materials. We've got plain balsa floats, and we've got Avon floats, which I've now lost, with balsa bodies. If you want to make really good wagglers, and this is a very, very simple waggler that I've showed you before, all you need is pieces of peacock quill, which is incredibly light. It's very, very, bird quills are remarkable things. They've got this tough skin, and they're filled with a sort of natural foam, if you like, and it's got a bit of flex in it. I suspect if you're clever enough, you can probably straighten them out. For wagglers, you want the float to be as straight as possible. I don't know how straight this one is. It's pretty straight, actually. Ivan Marks, who was one of the truly great float anglers of all time, when he made waggler floats, he wanted them absolutely dead straight. You could argue that, well, if this one's a bit bent, it will still work. Yes, it will still work. It won't quite sit right, and it won't cast quite as true, but what a fantastic material. And for Wagglers, I think that's the best material of the lot. So second material, if you're going to make floats for waggler fishing, is peacock quill. And of course you can add a body to the base. This is an antenna float, and it's got this one slightly curved, quite an old float I made well over 40 years ago, and it's just got a slim peacock tip there and a balsa body at the bottom. Note it's right at the bottom. There's no great big 5mm of cane at the bottom. The eye is right at the bottom of the base, and it will fish better like that. This has just got an eye on it. There's nothing to put a float. There's nothing to put a float adapter on it, because they haven't been invented when that was made. So peacock quill, second really important thing for float making. A traditional stick needs a base that is heavier, and this is a classic Pete Warren stick float. If we put a line across it, above that's balsa, and below it there's a piece of cane that's spigoted in. So a spigot is where it's shaved down so it's thinner, a smaller hole into the balsa, and then tapered off. And this has got a bit of weight, and that gives it the correct, it sits right. If you made this completely out of balsa, it would cast differently, it would sit differently, it would take more shot, and it wouldn't be a stick float, it would just be a balsa float. Still work, but it wouldn't be a stick float. So dense cane, this is probably about 4mm, is useful for making what we might call a traditional stick float. It's thought that possibly the very earliest stick floats made in the mid to late 50s by Benny Ashurst used spindles from cotton spinning machines that were then being scrapped, and that they may have been lignum vitae, which is a very dense wood, denser than cane. And I think with cane, if it dries out, you get the green garden canes for plants in garden centres, and as it dries out and it shrinks, it becomes denser. So almost old garden canes that have been stored in a greenhouse for decades, that have been heated, if you like, very slowly, and become shrunk and denser, can give that little bit of extra weight and make a very good stick float. Cane, this is a homemade stick float, and you can see the cane on that is I've just varnished it. Cane is also useful for antenna floats. In the sort of 50s and 60s in particular, antenna floats made with, similar to this but with a cane stem, were very popular. Peacock quill didn't really start to take off until the late 60s and into the 70s. And initially what we now call wagglers and bodied wagglers had other names. They were swingers and this, that and the other. The balance, if we substitute cane, a balsa and cane, the balance is different. So if you shot this up, it will take more shot because you haven't got the weight of the cane, you've got the very light peacock quill. So when it casts, this one with the peacock will follow the weight, that's the lock-in shot much better. It's a better balanced float. The sensitivity will depend entirely on the diameter of the material, not what it's made of. But it's, if you can make them with Peacock quills, and Peacock Wagglers and body Wagglers did take over from the cane versions, like I say, in the 70s. So if you want thin tips, you can use cane. So all in all, and I've got on this, like, this is like a 2mm thin tip. You make quite a sensitive float out of that. Shot that right down. So the third material, essential material, is cane. You can buy kebab skewers, which are about 2.5 to 3mm. Cheap way of buying cane. These canes are proper float making canes, and if you can get hold of them in sort of 2, 3, 4mm, that's going to give you a good variety to work with. Not many people use stick floats, not many people make stick floats, but this is an old John Dean one, and this has got a piano wire base, and amongst this selection of wire there is some piano wire that's ideal for stick floats. There's also some alloy rod, which you can make versions of the John Allerton floats, a little bit thicker. I think that's about 1.6mm alloy rod, and the wire there is about 0.8 of a millimetre, if I remember correctly. So less useful, but still worth, if you're going to make stick floats, worth having. For instance, Drennan uses this is a wire stem Avon, quite a nice float. One of the few sort of shop bought floats I actually use, apart from ancient stick floats. I believe Drennan's now using a titanium wire, which is more springy than this sort of stainless wire. Less like, you can probably bend that quite easily. I'm not going to wreck that float. That's our A grade of materials: balsa, peacock, cane. To make the bodies, there are other materials. One of the materials that you'll see, if you ever look in a skip on a building site, you'll probably come across this. It's Roha cell foam, which is put into cavity walls. So when they build cavity walls, they put this in there for insulation. It's quite strong. It's easy to work. You can slice it up. It does dent, and if you put any paints with spirits in them, stuff that uses thinners of white spirits, it will melt this stuff. So any paint you use, you can't put polyurethane or, say, the old Humbrol paints. You have to use water-based paints on this stuff, or it will melt. My mate Phil years ago gave me some of a different foam, and this stuff came in sheets, a similar sort of thing, and you can carve this. And this foam, I can't remember what it is, whether it's polypropylene or something, was used. We got the offcuts from aircraft, making the bullcocks for loos on aircraft, because of the pressure drops. This stuff is incredibly strong. You can get a cube of this stuff, about 1.5 inch cube, put it on a dead flat floor and stand on it. It is so incredibly strong. There's a tiny bit of flex, but you can work it, and I have made Avon floats with it. I haven't got very much of it. This is one that's sort of part made. I ought to use up what I've got. I've had it 30 odd years. You can put spirit-based paint on this. Doesn't touch it. You can put cellulose dope on it. Doesn't affect it at all. You need to seal it with something like dope. We tried lighting it with a cigarette lighter, never touched it. Acetone, never touched it. What it is, I don't know. If someone could make moulded float bodies out of this stuff, it would be incredible. A big sheet of it back in about 1992, which is 8 foot by 4 foot, cost £2,000, but you'd get one hell of a lot of floats out of a sheet. So it sounds expensive, but this stuff I'm sure is far cheaper. I don't know what this stuff costs. Ask a builder's merchant, but this stuff gets used by the acre. So that's just a maybe. That one, I don't know where you get it from. One traditional float making material is cork. This is a part made cork on goose quill float, and it's using proper cork, and it's a nice material. Proper cork's quite hard to get hold of. Cork on wine bottles is usually like this, which is reconstituted cork, and when it's been squeezed down, you can put it with some water in a microwave for a minute or two and it will come back out again. It's not a very nice thing to look at. It's a bit, because it's made with glue, it's a bit heavier than balsa or cork in its natural state. So I'd say yes to cork, natural cork, not really reconstituted cork, no thanks. This is a cork on quill float. This was made by Stan Bennett in the mid-80s, over 40 years old. Very nice little float, and that's using proper natural cork on a crowqill. So crowqills for Avon floats, definitely a good choice. I've now switched to resolve hollow tips for my Avon floats and Wagglers, and with the Wagglers you can cut the top off and put a scoop. We'll go on to Wagglers later in the series in detail, which makes an incredibly sensitive float. Once you use those hollow tips, the resolve ones, they shine out in the sunlight. They really are easy to spot, brilliant to fish with. So the resolve float tips are definitely one to use. That I've got none of here. I'm now going to just go over the materials that I'm going to say. Really, I've made floats with drinking straws 50 years ago, over 50 years ago. Back then, plastic drinking straws were easy to get. A lot of them were quite thin. Much later, you got much greater diameter drinking straws, and now the sale of plastic ones has been banned altogether. You get paper ones. Plastic Wagglers sort of work. The little I make little Wagglers out of these quite fine straws. I've managed to source some about a decade ago before they banned them. They're okay, and you can buy lots of plastic Wagglers. They don't fish as well as Peacock, significantly. They don't. They're just not as good. And if you can get hold of Peacock, you can make a far better Waggler out of Peacock quill. In the early 70s, floats were sold by the million by people like Ultra Floats, which Billy Lane, Ivan Marks, Peter Drennan was doing hundreds of thousands, and others. And there was a lot, people were catching on to Waggler fishing with Peacock quills, and the demand was so massive that these float makers looked for substitutes, and they came up with Sarcandus reed, which is also known as Indian reed. The stuff doesn't taper like Peacock. There is a taper, but it's very slight. It's quite hard to paint. You have to sand it quite carefully. It's not as light as Peacock. You can make satisfactory floats out of it if you can still find it. I'd say Peacock every time. On a similar vein, back in the day, back in the 50s and 60s, people went and found Norfolk reeds, which when they grow, you get acres of them, or miles and miles of riverbank with Norfolk reeds, and if you wait for the right time you can harvest them. You don't want them at the moment, you want last winters that haven't rotted. They're reasonably strong. Again, there's no taper. They're quite heavy. You won't make a good waggler out of them. You'll make a float you can catch fish with, and it may look lovely, but it won't be that good. So that's another one to... Sorry. The same goes for pampas grass. No, really. People use old stinging nettle stems after the winter when they've dried out. Really. And all these other things, old biro tubes. Really. Come on, use the good stuff, make good floats, and we can make some progress. I think I've covered all the materials I've got here for now. So that's it for this week. Next time I'm going to look at some design principles of floats, and then we'll look at float tips, why they matter, how they matter, and then some more specifics around stick floats and wagglers, Avon floats, and one or two others. Until next time, it's goodbye for now.